Hey, Pine Belt, thank you so much for joining us for this update on the digital desk. We are here with Amy Posey, our digital journalist, and we're going to be giving you more details and updating you on the teen death that happened at Mar-Jac, the poultry plant in Hattiesburg. Amy has been working on this since we found out about the story, giving us all the online updates and actually doing all the investigations into this and looking into the allegations. So tell us a background on Duvan Perez, his death, and what's happening now with the investigations.
So just to remind everybody, Duvan Perez was a 16-year-old boy who died in an incident at the Mar-Jac Poultry plants. There's still a lot of questions, a lot of things that aren't known, but this story captured international audiences pretty quickly.
Yeah.
When we first got notice that there had been an incident at Mar-Jac's, the incident had been on the Friday before the July 14th, and we started getting phone calls on Monday from other workers calling in anonymously saying something had happened. From there, we were able to get just the basic of details, like his age, his name, and we broke the story for the Pine Belt area.
Yeah, that's important to mention for the Pine Belt area because days before it was breaking or had already broken somewhere else. So tell us about that.
Yes, it had actually broken in Guatemala the day after the incident. So Duvan Perez, he is a native Mayan from a village in Guatemala. And his family had communicated with family that was still back in Guatemala what had happened. They had started going to local media outlets, to social media journalists in their area, and the news had already started to spread. Here in the U.S., it took longer. And I really feel that that is a very good example of what happens a lot of times in some of these communities, because when you have incidences like this that involve major corporations, communities that their first language isn't necessarily English, communities that don't know who to talk to, where to talk to in the area that they're in, sometimes you don't even hear about it.
Yeah.
So the fact that we were even able to hear about it as quickly as we did, even though it was a few days, was important.
Right. And so after we started hearing about it, after you started doing some digging and investigating, you found out that it was bigger and deeper than a one person's death. Even though Duvan Perez's death is very important,
tragic.
It was much bigger than that.
Yes, it very much was bigger. Duvan, being 16 years old and working at the chicken plant, was illegal. The Fair Standards, the Fair Standards Act, Fair Labor Standards Act, there we go.
Yeah.
They have a list basically of what they call hazardous occupations. And these are jobs that are considered so dangerous that no one under the age of 18 is allowed to work in them. And all jobs dealing with machinery that's found in meat and poultry processing plants are included in that. Specifically listed within that is sanitation at meat and poultry processing, which is significant because that is what Mar-Jac, the company, has confirmed Duvan was doing at the time of his death. Now, we don't have a lot of details on what the actual incident was. All that we have been able to confirm was that he became caught in some of the machinery while he was cleaning, and the injuries that he received from being caught in the machine caused his death.
And so a lot of the questions, the main questions as soon as the Pine Belt heard about this was, how does a 16-year-old get hired in the first place? And so what have you been finding out about what Mar-Jac is saying about how a 16-year-old got hired, and them actually giving us information or telling us that another hiring agency did it? So just explain all of that for us.
So the important thing to say about how he got hired is that nobody knows for sure at this point at this point, we have a lot of he said, she said. There's a lot of rumors going around online. What Mar-Jac has said officially is that they rely on a staffing agency to fill their positions, and that the staffing agency failed to properly vet Duvan and find that he wasn't actually the age he was claiming. They said that his paperwork had him listed as 32 years old. Now, looking in a little bit deeper to that and speaking with some people who have been through hiring processes, there are staffing agencies that do work with Mar-Jac employees, that do recruit for them. But we've also had several job seekers that have talked to Mar-Jac's Human Relations Department. And we have spoken to Mar-Jac's Human Relations Department in seeking to get statements from them. So they do have one. Now, what Debbie Berkowitz, who, if anyone was watching any of the previous broadcasts, would remember, she is a former senior advisor for OSHA. She's worked in meat and poultry processing plants for over 4 decades. So she has a really long career dealing with this industry. And how she explained the law and who is actually responsible for making sure that this law is followed is it all falls on the company. And you know, there's debate online. We've seen it in our own comments that Duvan may have been responsible because he provided false documentation in order to get the job, that his parents may be responsible because they allowed him to work there.
Yeah, I've seen those comments.
And it's one of those, I can understand the gut reaction to want to make some of those statements, because we all can look at our own children and think, oh, well, I wouldn't let my child do that. But the two things I think people have to remember here is, one, the law puts the onus, the responsibility to follow labor standards on the company. So if Mar-Jac is found to have knowingly violated the labor laws, then they will have to answer to the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division, who is conducting an investigation. The other thing I think that's important to remember in this is that we don't know what Duvan's family situation was. As I said before, he was a Guatemalan native. From what we've been able to find, he came to Hattiesburg area about the time he was 12 years old. There are a lot of things that migrants face, whether they're documented or undocumented. And I want to clearly state that we have had no evidence that Duvan or his family is undocumented. What we've heard is we haven't had a straight answer.
Okay.
Is the best way to put it. But being Guatemalan natives, there are a lot of people currently seeking asylum in America from Guatemala that are Mayan natives or other indigenous groups because of what is happening there. And so we don't know fully what their situation was. We don't know the financial situation. We don't know what was happening there. And I think that this is a time, instead of just casting blame blindly on a family that is grieving, that has had this tragic loss, that we need to take a step back and say we need more information before we can make those kinds of judgments.
And in needing more information, you know that OSHA is now involved, investigating, looking into this. You just mentioned another Department
Yes.
of Wages.
Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division.
They've started an investigation. What have you learned from those investigations happening, especially with OSHA?
So the Department of Labor and OSHA have both said they can't comment on an ongoing investigation. However, there was a rumor that was going around online and that had been reported by several other sources that Mar-Jac had barred OSHA from entering the facility. The Department of Labor did comment to say that that was incorrect. Mar-Jac has said that they are going to be cooperative with the investigation, and the Department of Labor and OSHA have given no indication that they haven't been.
And so when you and I were talking, we were talking about the things that you knew for sure in looking into this information and investigating. So let's talk about any other incidents at Mar-Jac or other poultry plants that has happened in the last few years. So let's talk about the things we went over yesterday. You were saying that this is the third death in less than 3 years?
Yes. So over the last just about at 3 years, there have been 3 deaths.
Okay. And this is at Mar-Jac?
This is at the Mar-Jac's Hattiesburg facility,
okay.
The same one that Duvan was killed at in his incident.
Okay.
Over the last 10 years, we pulled all of the OSHA records for this plant. And we found that they had 8 safety violation citations during that 10-year period. Several of those resulted from the fatal incidences that happened in the last 3 years. And there were also several amputations. All of the ones that were listed in that 10-year period were fingers.
So being that those incidents have happened, were those investigations over? What was the outcome of that? Does a company face a fine, or what happens in those situations?
They had been fined money for some of the violations, and they had been issued in their citation a fine for the deaths. Now, let me correct myself here, because I can't remember if it was the amputation that had been settled outside or if it was the death. But there was for sure one of the deaths was still under investigation. That was the one that occurred mid 2002. That one was another incidence of an employee getting caught in the machinery and essentially being kind of crushed. It was listed as an eviscerator, so I'll let everybody use their imaginations probably what that was like. That one was still ongoing. Mar-Jac was appealing or contesting the findings of OSHA.
And being that you just mentioned the deaths and the injuries and everything like that, we were talking about how you learned how dangerous meat and poultry, the industry as a whole is. So just talk about what you found out about how dangerous these plants are and any other information about how our poultry industry in Mississippi maybe compares to others in the country.
Yes. So the meat and poultry processing plants are considered some of the most dangerous or hazardous occupations. They have a higher than average rate of fatal injuries, and they have a higher than average rate, almost double the overall average rate of serious injuries. Most of the serious injuries associated would be amputation, hospitalization, or the loss of an eye. Chemical burns for those that are working sanitation in these plants are also very common.
Wow.
It's an industry that has been under scrutiny for a long time. But here in kind of the last couple of years, it's begun to get more scrutiny. Because of attention from the Biden administration, from the Department of Labor, looking at these companies and their records. Debbie Berkowitz, again, the expert that we spoke to, the former senior advisor, she said 8 violations within a 10-year period, 3 of those being deaths within a 3-year period, is one of the worst that she had ever seen.
Oh, wow.
Now, poultry processing is a major industry here in the Pine Belt. I actually just yesterday pulled up some updated statistics from the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics. And they actually have Jones County listed as the county with the 4th highest population of poultry plant workers.
Wow.
So it is one of our major industries in this area. Now, of course, not all of that is with Mar-Jac.
Right.
We have other companies as well, but as a whole, the industry is very dangerous.
Yeah. And so tell me some other background of the culture of the company that we were talking about, not it just being like a dangerous industry, but I guess the culture of working in a poultry plant within itself. You had given me an interesting statistic yesterday about if you were to get hurt on the job and like disabilities and what you could be awarded. So just talk about that.
So I don't think a lot of people understand or know how workers' compensation actually works. Mm-hmm. There are specific worker compensation laws. And so a lot of people think, oh, I get injured on the job, I'll just sue the company, get whatever money I need. And that's not actually how it works. Worker compensation laws allow states to set their own compensation plans. And in Mississippi, we have some of the lowest in the country amounts that you receive in compensation for your injuries. We had this basically chart that showed what each part of your body was worth.
And yeah, so like, and it was split in half, right?
Yes, it was. On one side was Mississippi, on the other side was the national average, and it was almost half. Yeah. Of what it was. So I mean, you could go down, you know, your head is worth this much, your arm is worth this much, your leg is worth this much. When it comes to, like, say you're injured and you're injured so badly you become disabled. Mm-hmm. Mississippi has the lowest weekly pay amount that you would receive for being disabled on the job. They also have the lowest amount of time that they will pay. So we have thousands of workers that are working in this dangerous industry, and we have worker compensation laws that are the lowest in the country of what could actually help them. Yeah. And so you're put into this situation where you're having to take a lot of risk when you take these jobs. And
where's the protection?
Right. And that's why a lot of Americans won't even take the job. They won't look at it. Yeah. And so you get in these plants, a lot of times you're dealing with marginalized communities. You're dealing with people from demographics of poverty or low income, minorities, immigrants are a major population within meat and poultry processing plants. And a lot of times these people that are working there, they either don't have the financial security to feel safe enough to speak up when they see something, or they don't know how, especially dealing with a lot of migrant populations that maybe don't have English as their first language. And in the case of a lot of the Guatemalan refugees that are coming to the United States right now, some of them don't even speak Spanish. They're indigenous and they speak their indigenous languages. And so it's not uncommon that you will see in a poultry processing center people speaking dozens of languages. It can be a very big mix. It's one of those where unless you've actually been in it and seen it, it's hard to describe in a way that you can fully understand.
And so finally, what happens next? Since all of this is under investigation, I guess there's not much more information that we will be able to give out to the public. So if you can just give us a closing of what happens next, what do we know about maybe Duvan Perez's family? Where do they go from here?
Right. Duvan's family has so far decided to remain private in their grief and in how they are handling the situation. We do know they are working with some immigration advocacy groups who held their own press conference to kind of help them navigate what comes next for them. They have requested that people be patient and to allow them to grieve and release their side of the story or their information that they choose to release in their own time. Now, as far as Mar-Jac is concerned, we are at this point waiting for the OSHA inspection and the Department of Labor's inspections. We don't know for sure how long that will take. Debbie Berkowitz said that usually it would take about an average of at least 6 months. And she said that when both are investigating at the same time, they tend to time their investigations to end at the same time so that both come out. So in about 6 months from here, we'll start looking more for where are the results of this. The results will be public. All OSHA inspection results and citations are public. You can actually look up on the OSHA's website different facilities and see what their history is. That's how we were able to find Mar-Jac's history of OSHA violations. So that will be made available once it is out. Now, the immigration advocacy groups that are working with Duvan's family, they are also calling for additional inspections at Mar-Jac and kind of the industry in Mississippi as a whole. Those would come from federal agencies that deal with helping asylum seekers and refugees, just basically going through and making sure that there's not a population here that's being exploited or being made to work in dangerous conditions, and that there is nothing else happening below the surface. Now, none of those investigations have happened yet, but they have been called for. We are also looking into locally. We are trying to reach out to some of our local representatives. Since Mar-Jac is a larger employer in this area, we're trying to find out if there's anything that our local representatives would be willing to do or to work with to make sure that the Hattiesburg residents and the Pine Belt residents here are in a safe environment. But as of right now, nobody has been willing to speak on it.
All right. Well, Amy Posey, guys, our digital journalist, doing great work and great investigation on this. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you later.